Hello, this is an interview with pro-life Disney princess Deanna Falchook from episode 28 of The Stephen Herreid Show. Like and subscribe to The Stephen Herreid Show on YouTube, iTunes, and Google Play, and follow us at Catholic Vote on Facebook and Twitter. I'm your host, Stephen Herreid. And now I'm joined by Deanna Falchook, who has a great response to a very silly and bumbling tweet from a Planned Parenthood center from last week. Last week, Planned Parenthood tweeted something to the effect of, "We need to have a Disney princess who has had an abortion." And Deanna, your comeback was gobsmacking and wonderful, and it was in the form of an article at Medium called "I Was a Disney Princess and Had an Abortion." It's a tragic story that ends in redemption, nonetheless. So thank you, first of all, for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
So one thing that I just think you have a wonderful insight, it's a really original and important insight that could be applied in so many ways. In your piece, what you do is it's almost like you're looking through the eyes of the child who says the emperor has no clothes. And telling and reassuring that child in all of us not to be intimidated when people say, "Oh, shut up, you don't know."
Right.
Because in a way, it's almost like you're saying, you know what? The classical categories in fairy tales of good guys and bad guys are played out in real life. So look out for the bad guys, and you should be on the side of the princess. It's a really beautiful piece.
Yeah, and the amazing thing is that we know our fairy tales and our princesses because it's so ingrained in a good way into our, into our psyche, into who we are. And I believe that for people who maybe, aren't in, let's say, church or listening to the Bible stories, this is where we start. We start with the fairy tales, and yet they have the stories of redemption, of, being able to rise above the ashes into a place on high. It's the Jesus story. And so it basically woke me up because I'd been writing about Cinderella and working on a book, but I hadn't really been blogging out about my personal experience in a while. And I just had to, because it was like worlds collided. Disney princesses and abortions, and I just felt like I needed to say something and respond.
Yeah, well, I mean, it maybe a God-given opportunity.
Yeah.
Providence works in funny ways. And it's funny that you get such an important moral message from something that most of us would see as, something we would dismiss as a thing of childhood, right?
Yeah.
With Disney princesses. And you're taking these stories and you're saying, no, I'm going to analyze them. And frankly, what you're doing is you're analyzing them in a classical way.
Yes.
These, from the perspective of a Christian. A Christian is a timeless being, in a way. And in other words, you're refusing to just say, these are stories about, girl power from 2018.
And what does it mean to truly be empowered? I've been thinking a lot about, Planned Parenthood and, the subject of choice when they discuss, having an abortion as if that empowers you. From my personal experience, and I'm raising 4 daughters. I have 7 children and a son-in-law altogether. So I'm teaching my kids. My personal experience is that when we walk through the unplanned, unexpected chapters of our lives, and sometimes it's grueling, like those princesses. Sometimes it's like we're slaying dragons and having to face the evil witches or the evil ones in our lives in order to conquer and find our place into the top of the castle. And so I really felt strongly about this. It's just brought up so much. In 1 week, what this has brought up, the dialogue, the women and men know these stories. And it's like it's always been there, but we don't really discuss it. And one temporary, let's say air quotes, accidental tweet that was pulled back brought up so much that is so deep in our hearts that it's been amazing. I mean, a whole movement is being created from this one accidental tweet.
Before we get to that, why don't this would be a good time to go back and tell your story, because it also is a story of, you can return from wherever you've been, and there's redemption. And it's a very moving story. Could you share that with us?
Sure. So I was raised by my awesome mother. She was a single mother because my parents were divorced. And then I had 3 sisters. And then I had all of these amazing great aunts who were my grandmother's sisters. And I remember as a child saying, they'd say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'd say, "I want to be a mother." And then they meant well, because their messaging, the messaging that they had was that we need to rise above the oppression that we're in as housewives or whatever. It was kind of a false messaging, but it was brought into the next generation. So that when I grew up, because I said, all right, then I guess I have to be something else first. I have to aspire and accomplish before I can reach my dream. My personal dream was to be a mother. So I was very talented, and I was a singer, and I ended up getting a great job as a teenager working at Disney in front of the castle, singing 5 days a week, doing the recordings. It was so much fun. And I was 18, and I ended up getting pregnant. And at that point where I will tell you, I was, away from the Lord. I sort of grew up in this environment where, women could choose, and also in the entertainment business, everybody, that's what they do, right? So no pressure from Disney because they did not know. But I made a decision to have an abortion, expecting I would feel relieved and go back to work on Monday. And I went back to work on Monday, and I started singing and dancing, and I felt like the life force was sucked out of me. It's like I did not, and that's kind of a, very appropriate metaphor, but I literally had a hard time dancing and singing, and I started to have these unexpected, I was never a person that fell into depression or anything like that, but I had lost, like I would just curl up in a ball when I would go home. And so eventually I quit the job that I was trying to save, broke up with the boyfriend that, I was trying to keep, and wanted to kill myself. Eventually, it was like in that moment, my mother called me, like when I was really contemplating this. She did not know either. And I thought, I can't do this because of her. It's like she's a single mother that raised these girls. We were her life. And I felt devastated by my decision at my loss of my child, who, a lot of people could easily say you didn't even know this child, but I knew this child in my heart. And to think what that would do with her. So I basically just got strong and just stood up and went on with my life. But I found forgiveness in the Lord, and I found I started to study why I did that and what it was and what messaging and what is it? It's just this. It's an indoctrination in our minds, right? So I pulled out of it, though, married a great guy, had a daughter, praised God, said to the Lord, if nothing else in my life ever happens that's amazing, that's fine. I have this redemption story and this one child. And then when she was 5 or 6, I took her to Disney. And when we got there, I'm sorry, this text thing's going off, but
sorry.
I was able to, I was there for like a few days, and I conceived my son while I was there. And then, so that was amazing. The first time back, I conceive a child, and I'm thinking, the Lord is just showering me and lavishing me with love. And, there's no shame. There's like, he favors me and he loves and adores me. And then I went on to have a calling to adopt. And when I ended up wanting to adopt, my first reaction was like, oh no, life is perfect. I have a boy and a girl. Who am I to think that I should adopt? But it was a calling from the Lord. And I adopted it.
Can't ignore those.
I adopted a little girl from Guatemala that we named Matea, which means gift from God. She was born to a 14-year-old woman. Then we adopted 3 children from Ethiopia whose parents died of AIDS, and they watched the mother die. It was devastating. And then in 2011, we adopted my son Alec, who was labeled, he's from Ukraine, he was 5 years old, 2 days old, he was abandoned by his mother, labeled invalid. And when we went to get him, they said, we're really happy you came, because we were about to transfer him from the baby home to a place where children as healthy as him have been dead within 6 months because of the rampant abuse. They were going to transfer him to the equivalent to an adult mental institution, just because he was 5 and an orphan. So our family now consists of 7 kids, and my oldest daughter is married, so I have a son-in-law, and we live now next to Disney World, and we go into the parks every day. And the Lord placed upon my heart being able to use these stories of princesses and fairy tales as a way to communicate with people and to really share the strength of redemption and power and true authority through him, and elevate our longing to be near the King, and so I was working on that when all this happened.
Wow, yeah. That's beautiful. I think one of the most important things and I really do think it's inspired. You have this insight about almost in a childlike way, taking as valid the categories of good and evil that we see portrayed so clearly in fairy tales for children.
Yeah.
There are good guys and bad guys. I was talking to you before the call about Snidely Whiplash. You remember him?
Yes.
And I often come across people who are basically Snidely Whiplash. Everything is there except for the waxed mustache and top hat. And I think, how does this person get away with it? How is this person viewed as a good person, and how do they view themselves as a good person when they so classically embody the sort of stand-in for the devil, their way they're behaving? And it's funny. That's one of the things you pointed out in your great piece. Is Planned Parenthood might be really upset about Disney princesses as they are, these classic stories about virtue, really, and about redemption, because they're not very satisfied with the role that they play. You know what I mean? It looks a lot like, the witch who's after the princess.
There's so much perfection in the stories that Disney has chosen to highlight already, which, by the way, aren't originally Disney stories. They're ancient fairy tales. And so Planned Parenthood, what got me the most is, even though they brought back their tweet and took it off, is that I started to think about them sitting around a table trying to create a new dialogue and a new indoctrination for children as young as 2 or 3 years old. And remember, my story is that I was indoctrinated. I had to wait to become, and that's why I chose an abortion, because I had this messaging. We were told, they used the word in a derogatory way, barefoot and pregnant.
Here's the thing, though, that really bothers me is that that's unique to you as a woman. I can't be pregnant.
Exactly.
I can't raise a child. I can't do the things that women can do. That's a unique gift to womankind. And also, they can relate. And a lot of these fairy tales were written allegorically by Christians. They can relate to Christ the King and Christ the Prince of Peace in a way that men cannot, in a very special way. Someday my prince will come, the aria from Snow White. They can say that of God in a way that men really kind of can't. We don't relate to God in the same way. There's something very special that God has gifted women with in the way that they relate to Him as their prince, as their king.
Right.
Isn't there?
Yes, and pro-choice feminists despise the aspect of rescue, of any kind of what they perceive as the dialogue they want to show about submission and male and female coming together, to truly identify this power in life. And so they despise that. But the thing about, making a Disney princess that would cut off life, and like you said, it's so unique to us, is basically, for one thing, they don't understand the stories or the power or what they're getting into. Number one, they don't grasp. They haven't spent any time really looking into who Cinderella, Snow White, or what these stories do. If they did, they wouldn't even suggest that. And number two, they have to make it sound like the greatest act of control that we could have is to just annihilate another life inside of us. And from personal experience, like I said, when we move through these times in our lives that are difficult, and I have talked to women who have been raped, I have talked to women who have, all kinds of women, and, there's an aspect of moving through your pain and suffering. If we come together and talk about how can we battle through this and turn this into a miracle. How can we turn this into a miracle? So the thing about Disney, and this is something that's really important, this is getting more into statistics, but I was reading this morning because in February they came out with their new numbers of attendance. Every year, if you look at all of just the theme parks, not the overall Disney company, just the theme parks, there's about 140, 150 million people that come in to attend. They are drawn there. They hear the story of good triumphing over evil. All of this, they look at Cinderella's castle or Snow White's castle. So they know the stories, they're drawn to it. And my call to Christians and to anybody who really is concerned about the decline of the church is to be aware of, if you're a missionary and you're on the mission field, the greatest way to evangelize is to speak in their language. So I believe that the fairy tales, that people understand that, and that is a great starting point. If somebody's like, well, I don't really, they're turned away from the Catholic culture or the Christian culture in general, but maybe they're like, you can break the ice by talking about what they know about conquering good and evil in Cinderella, Snow White, whatever story that you choose. It's evangelism at its best. veiled in a way, but it's very wise during the times that we're living in when culture is outperforming Christianity overall to be able to consider different ways of communicating. I mean, Planned Parenthood understands how powerful it is to communicate these things. I mean, they're sitting.
That's why they're trying to get their claws on. That's why they're trying to get their claws on Disney princesses. They want that to become their messenger. Yeah.
Exactly. So we need to look at these stories and find the beauty and find I mean, we don't even have to change the stories much. We just need to highlight what it means and what it is in life. There will be unexpected times. There will be surprises. We will have to battle evil. It's just the reality of the world that we live in. I mean, if anybody is more warrior princess-like, it's the Christian and Catholic women that I know that have endured struggles and have come out on the other side glistening after being in the fire.
Amen. Yeah, that's my wife, by the way. That's many women I admire. That's awesome. And I think you're right. I think that's very right. I think what you're doing is you're speaking in cartoon clarity, and that's really what it is.
That's a great line.
In bright colors, in a way that vivid expression of reality in fairy tales sometimes surpasses the dreariness of the messaging of the villains in this world. And it might win out in the end. I think really you are gifted. This is a very special gift, this message. I think it's going to go places. By the way, just on the way out, I do want to give you a chance to pitch the fact that you are writing a book on this, which I'm very excited about.
Yes.
You've written about it in a new column, follow-up column at Medium entitled ProLife Princesses Unite in Defense of Cinderella. So tell us about that really briefly before I let you go.
First off, in the past week, a movement has grown. We have a Facebook private group called ProLife Princesses, which is amazing. So you can find that by finding me on Facebook, Deanna Falchook, and there will be a link there. Or just read my article, and there's a link at the bottom there from Medium. But I am writing a book called The Cinderella Mindset, and it's really about, I started just wanting to write about leadership traits that she has, but I'm working on that, and we are all getting together even now with dialogues about this topic because, I mean, you would not believe how amazing these women are that are stepping forward and sharing. They're powerful women of God.
Amen. Awesome. I can't wait to see where this goes. Please keep us in the loop. Keep us updated on this. Listeners, again, we've been talking with Deanna Falchook, who has a great and inspiring story. She is a Disney princess. She did have an abortion. We don't need that again. But she came out of the other end of it with a story very unlike what Planned Parenthood wanted, what they had in mind in Disney Princess. So thank you again, Deanna, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Do keep us posted.
Will do. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you. Well, thanks for checking out this interview from episode 28 of The Stephen Herreid Show. Again, you can like and subscribe to The Stephen Herreid Show on YouTube, iTunes, and Google Play, and don't miss the rest of this episode. I'm your host, Stephen Herreid.
On your mind.